Welcome back, everyone. Look, if you're currently gearing up for the Cambridge AS and A-Level Accounting 9706 exam, you know exactly how demanding and honestly how unforgiving this curriculum can be. It's tough. But today we are bringing you a high-energy, deep-dive explainer that is going to serve as your absolute strategic blueprint for completely dominating questions on sources of finance for business entities. We are going to break down the exact assessment framework Cambridge uses. We're going to dissect the examiner reports and arm you with the specific elite strategies you need to secure maximum marks. So grab your notes and let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this incredibly powerful insight, which comes directly from a senior examiner. The stakes for today's masterclass are high, but honestly, the path to success is surprisingly clear. The hard truth is that candidates consistently, year after year, leave easy marks on the table when dealing with sources of finance. And you know what the crazy part is? It isn't always because they don't understand the underlying accounting. Usually it's because they just don't understand the specific structured reasoning the examiners are actively looking for. They miss the hidden constraints of the prompt. But today, we are going to change that narrative completely.
All right, here is our exact logical progression for today's session. We'll hit the top examiner warnings, establish our core principles, break down the method mark strategy, unlock those critical evaluative marks, and wrap up with an exam strategy checklist.
Moving right into Section 1, Top Examiner Warnings. Let's uncover exactly where your peers are throwing away points. Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is that these major pitfalls are entirely 100% preventable if you just approach the problem with structured reasoning. When the examiner reports say answers are too vague, what they really mean is that students are just casually writing something like, "Oh, the business should issue shares." No. Examiners demand specific details. Are we talking about evaluating a rights issue or a public issue? Which one is better for this exact scenario? Generic answers get generic marks. Furthermore, overlooking your format and presentation instantly signals to the examiner that you lack professional accounting skills. To avoid these traps, a lot of top-performing students actually create their own mental acronyms for the specific factors affecting sources of finance. It ensures they never ever miss a detail when they're analyzing a complex scenario like weighing a debenture against an ordinary share.
Let's transition to Section 2, Core Principles, because you absolutely cannot evaluate what you do not deeply understand.
So, here is the crucial point, and consider this a major examiner alert. You literally must define your terms up front before executing your analysis. The principal examiner reports reveal this massive, consistent trend of candidates confusing key terminology. Think about it. If you were discussing a rights issue versus a bonus issue, or maybe long-term debt versus a short-term bank overdraft, you have to clearly define that contrast before you build your argument. Emphasize to the examiner why the difference actually matters for the business's liquidity or its control. Doing this prevents any ambiguity. It immediately shows the examiner, right off the bat, that you are operating with serious academic precision.
And this slide brilliantly illustrates how top-performing students operate. They don't just memorize isolated facts. They show connected, conceptual understanding across all three of these cognitive domains. The Cambridge syllabus explicitly states that you must demonstrate competence across knowledge, analysis, and evaluation. So it's not enough to just know what a source of finance is. That's just knowledge. You have to be able to analyze how it impacts the business mathematically. And then, the real magic happens when you evaluate whether it's actually the right strategic choice compared to all the alternatives.
All right, moving into our third phase, Section 3, the method mark strategy. This is where you mathematically prove your case. Listen closely, because this procedural framework right here is your elite strategy. Remember, marks are awarded for this exact systematic process, not just for magically arriving at the final answer. First, you deconstruct the prompt to understand all the hidden constraints. Then, extract the relevant data from the stimulus texts and tables. Next, select your analytical framework. So maybe you're calculating the gearing ratio, or perhaps the return on capital employed. Once selected, execute your math with crystal clear notation so the examiner can actually follow your logic. After that, verify those results for reasonableness. Does the number actually make sense? And finally, present them using the correct accounting terminology. Here's the secret. If you happen to make a calculation error in step 4, but your notation is perfectly clear, you can still secure incredibly valuable method marks. Process is everything.
Section 4, Critical Evaluative Marks. We are stepping into the top tier now, unlocking those higher-order assessment objectives.
So how do top-scoring candidates actually demonstrate evaluative thinking? This is the multi-stage analysis question you absolutely must answer to push your response into the absolute highest marking bands. Evaluative thinking means you have to step back from the raw numbers and look at the actual strategic reality of the business entity in front of you.
You must actively deploy these 3 critical thinking strategies if you want to make justified recommendations. Seriously, don't just accept the data at face value. Question the underlying assumptions. For example, if the scenario assumes a steady interest rate for a bank loan, ask yourself, well, what happens if those rates rise? You must also consider opposing perspectives. Sure, issuing new equity might successfully avoid heavy interest payments, but how are the current shareholders going to react to the dilution of their control? They might hate it. Finally, you have to justify every single decision with concrete, mathematical, and contextual evidence directly from the text.
And this kind of critical thinking naturally builds right into comparative analysis. You must use comparative connectives to evaluate both sides and draw conclusions on their relative importance. Listen, if you are asked to evaluate 2 different sources of finance, you literally cannot just write a paragraph about option A and then write a completely separate, isolated paragraph about option B. No way. You have to actively compare them, identify where their impacts are similar, identify where they diverge drastically. You need to be using connectives like whereas, conversely, or on the other hand to weigh them against each other before you even think about drawing your final conclusion.
This whole deconstruct, solve, evaluate cycle, this is the ultimate methodology for solving complex financial problems systematically. It perfectly maps to those 3 cognitive domains we discussed earlier. You identify and break down the information, that is your knowledge and understanding. You solve it systematically, that's your analysis. You check for reasonableness and make justified recommendations, that is your evaluation. If you stick to this cycle, I promise you, you will never write a vague, unstructured essay ever again.
Finally, Section 5, Exams Strategy Checklist. Let's synthesize everything into a professional skills review.
Following these strict conventions isn't optional. It is absolutely mandatory for proving your professional competence to the examiner. Do you remember those top examiner warnings from the very beginning of our session? Well, this is exactly how you defeat them. Applying proper headings physically organizes your thoughts. Using appropriate financial terminology proves your academic rigor. Ensuring correct formats are applied demonstrates real practical application, and providing clear, logical annotations acts as a literal map, guiding the examiner directly to where they can award you maximum method marks. Make their job easy.
Look, crushing Cambridge exams requires consistent, relentless strategy. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for Ace the Exam's IGCSE ONA levels at acetheexam_IGCSE. Turn on those notifications and start practicing those past papers immediately. You can't just passively watch this explainer and expect to walk in and get top marks. You have to actively apply this deconstruct, solve, evaluate cycle to real high-stakes scenarios to build up that muscle memory.
I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to challenge your approach the next time you sit down to evaluate a sources of finance problem. The assessment framework always prizes analytical depth over superficial breadth. So when you're writing your final conclusion, ask yourself honestly, did I just passively summarize the prompt? Or did I actually evaluate the data to make a powerful, justified recommendation? Keep that elite standard in mind, put in the work, and you will be well on your way to completely mastering Cambridge Accounting 9706. You've got this.